Welcome to this explainer. We're jumping right in today to unpack the absolute mechanical magic hiding just under the hood of your daily commute. I mean, think about it. Every single time you turn that key or hit that ignition button, you're kicking off one of the most perfectly choreographed sequences in modern engineering. But honestly, how often do we actually stop and think about what's really happening in there? Well, today we're popping the hood and we are demystifying the four-stroke engine.
Okay, let's dive right into this. When we think of a car engine, we usually just picture this big, heavy block of metal, some wires, maybe a belt or two. But to really get a grip on how your car moves, you've kind of got to stop thinking of the engine as just a regular machine. Instead, think of it as a highly specialized, heavily reinforced container for literal explosions. Yeah, you heard me right. Every time you drive to the grocery store, you are literally being propelled by thousands of tiny detonations.
Which brings us to our first section, harnessing controlled explosions.
So to get a 2-ton piece of metal moving down the highway, the whole process has to start deep inside the engine block. Inside these cylindrical chambers, fittingly called cylinders. The absolute core of this entire operation relies on burning fuel inside these extremely specific enclosed spaces. By bringing in a precise mix of air and fuel into the cylinder and igniting it, we create a small, totally controlled explosion. And because it's completely trapped in that cylinder, that explosive force has literally nowhere to go but out.
Now, that explosive energy has one very dedicated job. The force from that blast pushes hard against a cylindrical piece of metal sitting inside the chamber. That's called a piston. The explosion violently shoves the piston down, and then mechanical momentum brings it right back up and down, up and down. That rhythmic movement right there, that is the absolute heartbeat of your vehicle.
Let's move on to section 2, the 4-stroke cycle.
So that up and down piston movement we just talked about, it definitely doesn't happen at random. It actually follows a very strict structural roadmap inside the cylinder. We've got step 1, the intake stroke, step 2, compression, step 3 is the power stroke, and finally, step 4, the exhaust stroke. Every single cylinder in your engine has to complete these exact 4 steps in perfect order just to keep you moving forward.
But to really, truly appreciate how beautifully orchestrated this all is, we need to totally change our perspective. Let's just slow down time for a second. Imagine we're zooming all the way down into a single cylinder, watching this insanely fast process at an absolute deliberate crawl. We are in extreme slow motion now, right inside the engine block.
We kick things off with the intake stroke. Slowly, steadily, the piston moves down into the cylinder, and as it drops, it creates a vacuum. At that exact split second, a tiny mechanical door at the top, the intake valve, opens up. Because of that vacuum pulling down from the descending piston, a really crucial, precisely measured mixture of outside air and fuel gets sucked right down into the chamber. Next up is the compression stroke. The piston hits the absolute bottom of its path and then starts its journey back up. But this time, that intake valve snaps tightly shut. The exhaust valve is sealed shut too. There's zero escape. So as the piston rises, it's physically squeezing that trapped air and fuel mixture, packing it tighter and tighter into the very top of the cylinder.
Now, what's really interesting about this specific step is why we even do it in the first place. Like, why not just burn the fuel right away, right? Well, it's because by mechanically compressing that air and fuel mixture into an incredibly tiny space, we massively multiply its potential energy. Squeezing it makes the eventual explosion significantly more volatile, more powerful. We're basically loading a mechanical spring, making absolutely sure we get maximum energy out of every single drop of fuel. And then, bam, the power stroke. Right when that mixture is squeezed to its absolute physical limit, a tiny little electrical device, called a spark plug, fires off a bolt of electricity. It instantly ignites that compressed mixture, triggering a massive, violent explosion. The sheer force of this rapidly expanding gas has only one possible way to escape. It violently forces that piston right back down the cylinder. This sudden, aggressive downward thrust, that is where your car actually generates its power. This is the literal moment of propulsion. But hey, the cycle isn't quite done yet. We settle back into a steady, mechanical pace for the exhaust stroke. The piston, riding on its own momentum, starts moving back up the cylinder one last time. Now we just had a huge explosion, so the chamber is completely filled with useless burnt gas. To clear that out, a second little door at the top, the exhaust valve, pops open. And the rising piston essentially just acts like a broom, sweeping and pushing all those hot, burnt gases straight out through the exhaust system. It completely clears the chamber so the whole process can start fresh all over again. All right, moving to section 3. Suck, squeeze, bang, blow.
I know, that was a whole lot of mechanical engineering to visualize all at once. But mechanics have actually used a really famous, beautifully simple phrase for decades just to remember this exact rhythm. And I want you to remember this sequence because it maps perfectly to what we just watched in slow motion. Suck, squeeze, bang, blow. It's just a fantastic, super memorable rhythm that completely anchors those 4 highly technical strokes right into your brain.
Let's quickly map this catchy phrase directly back to the mechanics just to cement it. Suck aligns straight with the intake stroke, where the piston pulls the air and fuel in. Squeeze is the compression stroke, where the piston pushes up and forcefully compacts that mixture. Bang is the power stroke, that dramatic ignition that blasts the piston down. And blow is the exhaust stroke, pushing the spent, burnt air out of the tailpipe. Suck, squeeze, bang, blow. 4 actions, 1 perfectly continuous loop. Let's move to section 4 and see how this builds into motion turning the wheels.
Okay, so how exactly does a tiny piston bouncing up and down actually get you to the office? Well, we just watched that cycle in extreme, agonizing slow motion. But in reality, that 4-step sequence is happening thousands of times.
Literally thousands of times a minute. Just imagine that relentless sequence, suck, squeeze, bang, blow, suck, squeeze, bang, blow, happening over and over and over again in a continuous, breathless, deafening loop. I mean, while you're just sitting there casually listening to the radio, inside that engine block, multiple pistons are violently pumping up and down at an absolutely blistering, almost unimaginable speed. But here's the catch. Up and down motion doesn't roll a car forward, right? So here is the crucial mechanical conversion. The bottom of all these pistons are connected to a heavy, heavy piece of metal called a crankshaft. And the crankshaft is just brilliantly designed to take that frantic, linear, up and down pumping from the pistons and translate it into a smooth, spinning, rotational motion. It's honestly exactly like your legs pedaling a bicycle. Your knees are just going up and down, but the pedals, they're turning in a smooth circle.
And there is the final piece of the puzzle. That spinning, rotational motion created by the crankshaft gets sent straight through your transmission, down the drive shafts, and it ultimately turns the wheels of your car. The chaotic, explosive energy of thousands of tiny fires is harnessed, smoothed out, and translated directly into pure forward momentum on the asphalt.
So the very next time you buckle up and pull out of your driveway, I really want you to remember this explainer. You aren't just driving a machine. You are literally riding on top of millions of tiny, perfectly orchestrated explosions, all harnessed together to spin rubber against the road. It really makes you wonder if something as completely ordinary as your morning commute relies on such astonishing hidden complexity, what other everyday miracles are hiding right there in plain sight?